Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I have a few announcements I'd like to make before I actually begin, but I'm going to tell you I'm going to make a presentation, share some readings with you, and so forth. That will be recorded. Then we'll open this up for general discussion, and that will not be recorded. You see me with a backdrop of the temple sanctuary. I'm not in the sanctuary, I'm at our house. And I want to tell you that tomorrow night and Saturday morning, our Friday night and Saturday morning services will be recorded in the sanctuary. There won't be a congregation there, but it will seem more like the real thing to you. I also want to say this morning we have a little bit of competition. I understand that at 11 o'clock, which is now, on television, you can see John Lewis's funeral service at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. I'm sure most of you have recorded that, or it will be played over and over again. I think this is a very important event in history. And for those of us, and we're all, I think, except for one or two, old enough to remember John Lewis when he was a young man, I certainly do, and all the degrees of separation or non-separation. One of the degrees of separation, and we're just one away, I never met the man himself, but Rabbi Everett Gendler, who was so involved in the civil rights movement, up until this year, for obvious reasons, would spend his winters down here in Sarasota and would come on regular occasion to our services at Temple Beth Israel. So we have that degree of separation, and in some of the iconic photographs of the civil rights movement, where you see Martin Luther King and Abernathy and Rabbi Heschel, and then right at the end, he looked very nondescript at those days, Rabbi Everett Gendler. All right, to begin. Today is, in the Jewish calendar, the 9th day of Av. This is the anniversary of the destruction of the first temple, the anniversary of the destruction of the second temple. And since non-Jews knew that this was a horrible day in our history, an anniversary of all kinds of other sad events, like the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the upgrading of the military move against the Jewish rebels in the Warsaw Ghetto. This is something that was very, very much part of not just Jewish consciousness, but general consciousness all the way down the line. This takes place in the summer, and many congregations take a vacation of sorts over the summer and don't have major events. For many of us, we commemorated the 9th of Av at a Jewish summer camp. But there is a dynamic to what I call Judaism's summer schedule. Our ancestors thought the destruction of the temples was due to our misbehavior. What did I do to deserve all this? It's still part of our thinking. I don't subscribe to that. The Babylonians had a stronger army. The Romans had a stronger army. But in the weeks up to the 9th of Av, all the Haftorahs are words of rebuke. Why are you misbehaving? Why aren't you doing what you're supposed to do? And with this Shabbat, which is just a day off starting tomorrow night, we have Haftorahs of consolation. Comfort you, oh, comfort my people. And the whole tone of the Haftorah readings changes. Again, unfortunately, I don't know if this is emphasized enough, that sort of shift in tone, starting with Isaiah 1 with the Haftorahs of rebuke, and then with Isaiah 40, the Haftorahs of consolation. It is a very, very powerful shift in my mind, and I recall some years ago, I did a full summer program regarding the reading of those Haftorah portions. Now, what makes the 9th of Av distinct in its commemoration? It's a fast day. Unlike Yom Kippur, where we're supposed to wear white, on the 9th of Av, we wear black. It is a day of mourning. We wear white on Yom Kippur because we celebrate that God is forgiving us and bringing us back in love. I want to say that one of the interesting aspects of the 9th of liturgically, in terms of the prayers, in the evening service, which would have been last night, the Book of Lamentations is read. Now, let me explain why that is so significant. Lamentations, Echa in Hebrew, is a Megillah, a scroll. You and I hear the word Megillah and think of the Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther. There are 5 scrolls. Very, very rarely do we see a Lamentations scroll written out on parchment, just like a Torah scroll. I saw one once, just by accident. It is interesting, and I just discovered this a couple of days ago in a recently published 9th of Av prayer book, which I got from Israel, where it points out that before the reading, if you are reading from a scroll, you say a special benediction, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, al mikra Megillah, concerning the reading of this Megillah, which you would not say if you were doing it in a more standard form of just reading it out of a printed book. I need to mention that because that is something that stands out in my mind. The other thing that stands out physically, and here I'm speaking about what would be done in the traditional Jewish world. As you know, there's an evening service, a morning service, and an afternoon service. This is not a festival. It is still a weekday. A fast day is considered not a festival. And on a fast day, you would still, I'm speaking in traditional terms, wear tefillin in the morning service. On the 9th of Av, you don't wear your tefillin in the morning. Now, you're supposed to wear your tefillin. So what do? In the afternoon service, in the mincha service, you wear your tefillin, making it so clear that things are not done in the traditional, normal way of doing things. One other interesting thing before I share some readings with you, there have been many tragic events in Jewish history, and so many of them have been commemorated, almost subsumed under the 9th of Av. When we think of the destructions of the temple, we think of all kinds of other tragedies as well. And if we turn back to the middle of the last century, there was a real issue as to how the murder of European Jewry was to be commemorated. We now have a special day, Yom HaShoah, but there were those traditionalists who felt you don't start with new days, you subsume the destruction of European Jewry under Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And there are people who, resisting the modern world, resisting change, still look at things that way. I want to share with you a couple of things that are part of what I would call a learning commemoration. And I am going to share with you, read with you, an English translation of the 5th, that is the last chapter of the Book of Lamentations. It's only 5 chapters long. We could read through the whole thing, but I don't think it's necessary to do that. And we start with a theology that isn't all that unusual to hear today. For example, what did we do wrong to cause this disaster? What did we do wrong that the Babylonians and then the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple? And we have all heard people say, I think I've said on occasion too, what did I do to deserve all this when things went wrong in every way? It doesn't work that way. But our ancestors often thought it did. or thought that perhaps if they performed good deeds, it could sort of avert the evil decree. I'm going to read from the 5th chapter, and then I'm going to comment specifically on the very end. I'm going to read this in English, but I'm going to read the last 2 sentences in Hebrew first and then in English, and it may sound familiar to you. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Behold and see our disgrace. Our heritage has passed to aliens, our homes to strangers. We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. We must pay to drink our own water, obtain our own kindling at a price. We are hotly pursued. Exhausted, we are given no rest. We hold out a hand to Egypt, to Assyria, for our fill of bread. Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we must bear their guilt. Slaves are ruling over us, with none to rescue us from them. We get our bread at the peril of our lives, because of the sword of the wilderness. Our skin glows like an oven with the fever of famine. They have ravished women in Zion, maidens in the towns of Judah. Princes have been hanged by them. No respect has been shown to elders. Young men must carry millstones, and youths stagger under loads of wood. The old men are gone from the gate, the young men from their music. Gone is the joy of our hearts. Our dancing is turned into mourning. The crown has fallen from our heads. Woe to us that we have sinned. And again, emphasizing this was caused by the people's misbehavior. Because of this, our hearts are sick. Because of these, our eyes are dimmed. Because of Mount Zion, which lies desolate, jackals prowl over it. But you, O Lord, are enthroned forever. Your throne endures through the ages. Why have you forgotten us utterly, forsaken us for all time? Now I'm going to read the next verse, which is the penultimate, the second last verse, in Hebrew and then in English, and see if this sounds familiar to you. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Lenashuva Chadeshamenu Kedem. Take us back, O Lord, to yourself, and let us come back. Renew our days as of old. Then the last verse, for truly you have rejected us, bitterly raged against us. And that is where the text ends. But the rabbis couldn't deal with that. You're not supposed to end something on a negative tone. So if this is read rabbinically, the way it would be read in a synagogue on the 9th of Av, you say, verse 21, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadeshamenu kakedem. Then you read number 22, and then you say 21 again, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadeshamenu kakedem. I want to comment about that for a moment or two. These are the words we sing as we have returned the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, to the ark. These are words directly out of the book of Lamentations. Take us back, O Lord, to yourself. Help us change. Help us repent. And let us come back. All right, we confess, we agree, we have misbehaved. It's not the end. Let us reestablish the warm relationship with us. And to say renew our days as of old sounds positive, not for truly you have rejected us. We can't say that. Now, in terms of ancient history or ancient Near Eastern history, if a country is defeated completely in war and its religious structures, the temple destroyed, it's almost as if the gods of one nation defeated the God of the other nation. We Jews could not accept that. So instead of blaming God we blamed ourselves. I'm not saying this is good, but some goodness can come from this. Because if we feel maybe we misbehaved, maybe we'll improve our behavior anyway. There are sometimes good side effects. I'm not suggesting this should be our general focus. However, on the high holidays, and at Temple Beth Israel, we're spending most of our time and energy right now trying to worry about and prepare for the high holidays. We talk about this constantly. We're asking God to take us back, to meet us halfway. And as we finish the ninth of Av and this coming Shabbat, begin a new cycle of Torah readings, of consolation, that everything will work out, that we can put everything back in its place, that we can have a more glorious future and a better relationship with God, the mood sort of changes. It changes in a way, and I think, I'm speaking from personal experience, sort of spiritually prepares us for the high holiday mood. The high holidays are not a sad time. They're a positive time, because we know if we just change our ways, we can reestablish a relationship with God, and God will bring us back, and we will reestablish our days as of old. Now, a couple of other comments, and then we'll open this up for discussion. I know in the world we live in today, Jewishly and otherwise, for a long time, the 9th of Av was not commemorated much at all. People decided it was, why we temple, do we really want it rebuilt? Now, if you read an Orthodox prayer book, there are prayers for the rebuilding of the temple and the restoration of the sacrifices. In an ideal world, and I know it's an ideal world, and I'm not speaking about present day issues in the slightest, I don't think if we were to ever rebuild the temple, we'd reinstitute the sacrifices. This is my speculation. If you think I'm wrong, fine. Prove otherwise, you can't. I can't prove I'm right. I sincerely believe, it's pure speculation, that if, for example, the Jews had not revolted against the Romans and everything had somehow or another worked its way out, so the taxes are 120% of what you make, but people have dealt with that before too, the temple might have remained, and today would be a place of historical interest, but the sacrifices would have been evolved away. That's just pure speculation on my part. In recent years and decades, Jews have returned to this idea of this as being part of our history. Whether we want the temple to be rebuilt or not is not the issue. These were two major tragedies, the defeat by the Babylonians and the defeat by the Romans, that really affected our people. The defeat by the Babylonians, the Babylonian exile, the idea of the return, but not everybody returned. The defeat by the Romans, there is the myth, and I'll tell you why it's only a myth, that was the beginning of the exile. Well, more Jews lived outside of the land of Israel in the year 70 than in the land, but it almost became a religious turning point. And that turning point led us to where we are now. Our synagogue services of all varieties of Judaism, in a sense, have replaced the ritual of the temple. We didn't have a temple, so we're going to replace it. We're going to find a way of worshiping God anyway. And contemporary relevance. If we cannot be in our sanctuary for this Shabbat or for the high holidays, we're not giving up. We're going to have services anyway. It was a lesson that I think reverberates through the centuries when we find we can't do what we are supposed to do. And I mean really can't, not out of laziness or anything. We find newer and more creative ways of expressing our Jewish identity and our loyalty to God. I think that is what has kept us going. Now, for fun, and I just want to mention this I've had years of experience of having to speak to non-Jewish groups, whether they visited a congregation or I've had to visit them. And there are certain questions that come up all the time, and I'm going to mention one or two of them right now. One of the questions has always been, and it's almost as if you Jews are negligent, deficient in your religious practice, why don't you offer sacrifices anymore? Well, here's the simple answer, and you've got to give a simple answer to, I don't want to say to shut people up, but that's really what I mean, because they're not going to sit down and have a 3-hour class with you. They're not going to study the text one-on-one. The book of Deuteronomy says, and we're in the book of Deuteronomy now, you can only offer sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem. The Romans destroyed the temple. We can't offer sacrifices. The other thing that I hear constantly is, we need sacrifices in order to atone for our sins. Well, we have developed instead a complex liturgy, a complex religious service structure for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And if we look backward, it's not just a matter of going through the rote of saying our prayers or offering sacrifices. At the beginning of the book of Isaiah, it says, your sacrifices are meaningless, but it also says your words, I will not listen. We have to change our ways, and the ritual that follows is only a formality. This is a good high holiday sermon. You can't just come to the synagogue and read the prayers and think everything is fine. You have to change your ways. And we created a synagogue service that replaced all of this, part of the ongoing creativity of the Jewish people. At this point, I want to end this part of the session, and Corin is going to change whatever it is. It's not being recorded anymore, and we are going to be open to comments, questions, debate, etc.